Leonie.
Hi.
Thanks so much for having us today.
My pleasure.
So before we talk about your journey and how you've had such a great career, specifically in the housing sector, for anyone that doesn't know what City West Housing does, please can you share a little bit about the organisation?
Sure. So City West Housing is what we call it, an affordable housing provider. We won't get into definitions of affordable housing, but we basically provide subsidised rental housing for people on a range of different incomes, including workers. And we develop, so we're a property developer as well. So we're developing that housing and then we own and operate it. Yeah.
Many different arms, and I think it was over 900 properties in total.
Yeah, so currently 900 properties. We've got another 700 in a development pipeline, subject to funding.
And you've been with the organisation for about 7 years.
I've been, yes.
But your career, very impressive, has predominantly been within the housing sector.
That's correct.
I'd love to hear about your journey in terms of how you started out, if it was always not for profit or the charity space, and what has kept you working specifically in this sector. I think for anyone that's watching, it will be really interesting to hear because everybody's journey is different. Paint a bit of a picture for us.
So one of the things I often hear is people who get into the social and affordable housing sector kind of fall into it, and then most of us stay because we get quite passionate about it. So my career started in a completely different sphere. I studied as an accounting business degree, majoring in accounting. I went into a big four accounting firm and I started as an auditor, not actually knowing what audit was. And that wasn't a long trajectory for me. I went back to uni, it was part-time study, so I went back to uni full-time. Didn't know what to do, so became an auditor in the state government. And I guess that started my career in the state government. I didn't last very long as an auditor because I think I worked out accounting and auditing was really not my passion. The great thing about the public service was that I could try lots of different things. And so I went into training, and then I went into undertaking something called performance audits, and then I ended up in central government, effectively doing reviews of government agency programs and services. And that's how I came into the housing space, because I worked with a woman who was then the deputy head in the then Department of Housing. And I really admired her, and I thought, oh, this sounds really, really interesting. So it's completely almost accidental I ended up in housing.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. It's always great when you hear someone's had a good mentor, so fundamental to encouraging people to stay in a particular space. What were the sort of things I think that you think contributed to keeping you involved and excited about the work that the housing sector was doing?
So I think fairly early on I realised, I actually didn't know anything about housing, to be frank, like how it worked, really much about the model or the system. So for me early on, that was kind of a learning curve, but that department gave me so many different opportunities to try different things. And I think that has been the characteristic of my career, is I've had a thirst for learning, and I've, with some exceptions, never been afraid to put up my hand to say, let me try that, even if I know nothing about it. And so I worked across a very broad range of areas in that department around business strategy and asset strategy and affordable housing. And the last role I occupied in the state government in housing was oversighting the development of the community housing sector. And so City West Housing is a community housing provider. So that's where I came into contact with the whole not-for-profit housing system.
Wow, so that's great. No, I think the fact that you had the ability to learn across so many different functions and then sort of combine all of those experiences, and you're very busy. This is you've got a lot happening at City West Housing, and then also your involvement with the other associations and directorships. How do you balance that all?
A very good question. Maybe ask my family. No, don't ask them. So yes, I'm on the board of a national peak, and then I'm also on the committee for Sydney. I guess the board positions I've got are really focused around areas of interest and practice. So if I look at the national peak, that's about the community housing industry, and so it's completely aligned with my passion for this sector. It aligns to kind of me, driving strategy in the business with the board, and thinking about kind of those opportunities and trying to create opportunities for the industry as well. And in terms of the Committee for Sydney, interesting, they reached out to me a year ago because housing was such a hot topic. And we were a member of the committee, but they recognised that they needed someone who understood the affordable housing space on the committee, and so they approached me. And again, it's a think tank, but it's really interesting. It's an urban think tank. Currently, all of our 900 apartments are in the city of Sydney. We're in a city. So there was a lot of, I guess, alignment in terms of my job and in terms of the work of those two organisations.
Absolutely, yeah. So everything's benefiting from being involved with those organisations as well.
In terms of juggling time, well, you just make it. What do they say? Busy people. If you want something done, you ask a busy person. So, you just juggle. Yeah. And you make things happen.
Fantastic.
And you don't come into CEO roles if you're not, I think, probably able to juggle many things at once.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you have to work ridiculous hours. I probably worked longer hours in government, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it is about just working smart.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sure having a great team underneath you as well.
I have an awesome team, and yes, they pick up a lot of the slack. I mean, we're still quite small, so, part of my job is actually very hands-on.
Yeah.
And the same for members of my leadership team. But when I've recruited new people, they've said, okay, I've tried to warn them there's quite a degree of operational activity and you have to be kind of hands-on, and sometimes they've underestimated that. But they've also said, you know what, that's reminded me, it's given me contact with, the customer, for example, just reminded me why we're here, and it's been quite refreshing. So, you take the good with the bad.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely a piece of advice we only give someone looking to transition into the space. Prepare to roll your sleeves up and
absolutely. You don't quite have the same infrastructure and resources that you often have in much larger organisations, or in the case of some of my career, the state government.
And obviously, having a team that's willing to get involved and do the big picture thinking as well as being hands-on is what you're looking for. But what would be some of the other things that you look for in an ideal City West housing employee?
So values alignment is key. And you don't go into a not-for-profit if you don't have some sort of passion.
Yeah,
I would think. And we spent a lot of time, looking at values alignment and looking at that. That is a key criteria for us, thinking, is this person going to fit in the organisation? They don't have to have all the same belief system, but they absolutely have to share values. And at the end of the day, even though I said we develop, we're service delivery. And first and foremost, we're providing services. And the way we do it at the moment is through property development. So the values is really, really important. The other thing I think is someone who's willing, perhaps looking to learn and is open to kind of grabbing opportunities, because I think in organisations like this, you need to be quite nimble. And that's actually a strength, because if you can be nimble, then there are lots of things you can pick up and do, because your roles are quite broad. They cover quite a lot of things, right?
Absolutely.
It's much less, I guess, formulaic, and these are your sets of job descriptions. There's plenty to do. It's a growing business, growing industry. If you're willing to kind of pick up new skills, put your hand up for things, there's heaps you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always room for development and progression depending on what your interests are.
I mean, the challenges in a small organisation, progression may not be as obvious as in a bigger organisation. It's not as linear, but there's definitely things you can do. And I know in my career, I've actually, in some instances, gone sideways to learn new skills, partly because I was really interested in learning about that area, but also as a way of then going up again.
You mentioned earlier you were always really willing and interested to learn new things. So, and in terms of, I guess, some of the key attributes that, that being the openness and willing to learn, what were some of the things that you attest to, giving you the skill set to be the CEO of, I know you said small, but fairly sizable organisation?
Well, actually, even though I started by saying I came from a very different place, with an accounting background, and I'd make a terrible accountant, I think. To be frank, I wouldn't underestimate the grounding in understanding our business skills, and the numbers of times I've been really appreciative I can read a balance sheet. I'm not saying it's essential, but I do think, and I worked in business strategy as well in one of my first roles in the Department of Housing and Government, and again, that gave me a really good grounding around things like risk frameworks and stuff like that. So not essential, but certainly incredibly helpful. Now I've forgotten your questions.
And some of the key things that have attested to you being a CEO.
I mean, I've seen CEOs come in from a whole range of different backgrounds and skill sets. And again, I think it's just that recognition. You don't need to know everything. Some core knowledge of how business operates is probably really helpful. In a not-for-profit sector, you have a board, and you also need to, not necessarily know how to work with the board. You may not have worked with the board before, but be conscious of how that plays into decision making,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because that's really, really important, and that is a key facet of the organisation, and strategy setting and governance as well. But again, I think it's about how you surround yourself with. So there's, you know, plenty of people in jobs, in senior roles. They don't have to know everything. They don't have to be the technical expert. They just know how to get the most out of people, I think. So find the right people and then get the most out of them, and lean on people who maybe are experts. So I came into City West and I didn't know anything about property development. I now know enough probably to be slightly dangerous, but still I'm not an expert, but I have an excellent development team, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, you know, leaning on the people you've got and not being afraid to do that.
Fantastic. In terms of, you know, what's on the horizon for City West Housing, can you share with us anything exciting you've got in the pipeline?
So City West Housing has a really unusual history. It was set up by the state government in 1994. So we're 30 years old this year.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. And I've spent the best part of the last 5 years working with the state government to try and, I guess, create a more contemporary governance structure for us. So that's done two things. One is we weren't allowed to borrow money because we had government shareholders. So we've resolved that issue a couple of years ago. And then as of March this year, we no longer have government shareholders. So we've been put more on a level playing field with the rest of our peers in the sector. Why that's important is actually, it means we've actually got many more growth opportunities. We're actually able to leverage the balance sheet we've got. We're able to participate in a whole range of tenders that perhaps weren't available to us before. And I think I mentioned we've got a pipeline of projects. We've got 6 development projects in the pipeline that will deliver roughly 700 apartments.
Wow.
I couldn't have gone and bought those sites with any hope of developing them if we hadn't had some of these constraints removed.
Right.
So
that's exciting.
Yeah, because obviously, you know, I'm going to need private capital to help fund them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's very exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So I guess that growth of delivering our own developments, which is our core business, our bread and butter, and I think what we're really good at, and obviously managing those apartments and tenanting them. But we're also looking at diversifying, and I think every organisation, and particularly in the not-for-profit space, I would say, where funding is never a given or certain, you know, you have to look to diversify. And so we're also looking at moving into fee-for-service management as well. So
absolutely hot topic, I think, on every not-for-profit
agenda
at the moment is not being so reliant on grants, for example, and
and so I guess for us, we've spent, you know, probably the last 2 years, and we will continue to look at how do we make sure that we get the systems and processes in place that are fit for purpose for a large organisation. So that takes up quite a lot of time, but it's really, really important as well.
Yeah.
So,
awesome. And I guess, you know, like you said, it takes up a lot of time, potentially a challenge, and you've removed, I guess, that obstacle that you had with regards to the investment now. But what were some of the things that you would probably advise, obviously, other than be prepared to roll your sleeves up and get stuck in? It's not probably going to be a pure strategic role. But for someone who's looking to transition over from either the government or the corporate sector, because we do have a lot of candidates that are interested and really realising that their values and align more with wanting to work in community and helping, you know, benefit people. So, but there sometimes can be a bit of a contrast, obviously, in terms of how those work. What were some of the things that you would advise someone looking to move into the sector?
Well, I think the first thing is don't be afraid, because actually we are businesses. We might be charities, or we might be not for profit, but we are businesses. So we have many of the same challenges all of the same challenges probably that other organisations have, but with, I guess, a united purpose and focus, which is quite nice. And the number of people I see coming out of the corporate world in particular saying, oh, at the end of the day, I wanted to give back. I didn't want it just to be about the bottom line. You know, I mean, we have to focus on making profit. Like, that's really, really important. But it's profit that gets reinvested back into the purpose. So it is that profit for purpose nature. In terms of advice in kind of making that career leap, I would probably just say, just do it, right? You know, there are pros and cons, but I absolutely think if you come in with the right attitude and you come in with the right, you know, aspirations and values, you can do so much in these businesses. But they're also really interesting and they're quite complex, because it is that you're balancing that commercial need to be solvent, need to be viable, need to grow, that emphasis with also thinking about customers and outcomes and services. And there's always a tension between that kind of social purpose and commercial purpose. And I think that's why I've stayed in housing so long, because it resonates with me, and it's weird, it sounds weird. I kind of like that tension, but I like being able to make it work, make all those bits of the puzzle work. So yeah, I think if someone wants to come across, if they've got the passion, they've got the motivation, and as I said, they're happy to roll their sleeves up as well, and perhaps be a bit of a self-starter, because you don't necessarily have all of the same structure around you. I'd say do it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you and getting the insight to, what's happening at City West Housing and hearing about your journey. Really excited to see everything that you achieve over the next 12 months.
Thank you. And look, it's a lot of fun, can I just say?
Yeah.
I think I've said it before to people that I actually really love my job.
That's
brilliant. And I love coming to work. So there you go.
That's great. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lovely talking to you, Leonie.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye.